Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. It's Thursday, January 15th. We are going to break down day 3 in the Brendan Banfield trial, but a few things before we get started. Sorry this is out so late. I recorded an episode of Nancy Grace this morning, so that threw me behind a bit, but I had a great time. We were talking about this case, and I will post the links once that airs. Also, no court until Tuesday. There's no court on Fridays, and Monday is a holiday. And get this, y'all, this trial was supposed to take weeks. The state has 2 witnesses left, and they are expected to rest on Tuesday. I've had a lot of people say they're worried that there are no huge links to Brendan. So my thoughts on that is Juliana is not likable at all. But so far, her version of events line up with everything we've seen as far as evidence. But I have to say, it would have been nice to maybe have heard from people that knew Christine, who could testify to her character and the type of person she was, so that it would make it even more clear that going on this FetLife website was something she wouldn't do. But Juliana told the story of the plan from beginning to end, and so far, it all fits. Another thing, we have not heard from digital forensics yet, and I think that's going to tell a huge story. And one thing I've noticed this week, Brendan looks back into the crowd a lot. I'm not sure if his family is back there, but that dude's going to get a crick in his neck if he keeps it up. And today they did show a lot of the bloody crime scene photos. No reaction from him whatsoever, in spite of the fact that his side of the story is he walks in and finds a man stabbing his wife. You would think if that were the case, maybe some genuine emotion, nothing. So let's jump into the witnesses for today. First on the stand was Officer Kenner Fortner. He's a sergeant with the Fairfax County Police Department. Back in 2023, he was a crime scene detective. He responded to the house to take photographs of the scene. There were a lot of photos that were not shown on the stream. However, there were some of the aftermath after the bodies had been removed that showed the brutality of these murders. When he arrived on scene, Joseph was still in the house since he had been declared deceased on scene. Another thing is he noted Brendan's car was registered to the IRS. They show photos of the kitchen, and there was a laptop on the kitchen island. He found Christine's cell phone in the middle of a top drawer of a bar cart in Juliana's bedroom, showed photos of her closet, red lingerie items, caught his eye right there in plain view. He did not see any signs of forced entry or any struggle in any room other than the master bedroom. He came back for another search warrant much later, October 13th, 2023, and noticed some big differences. Juliana's bedroom closet was empty. He found all of her clothes, including the lingerie, in the master bedroom closet. Also, there were photos of Brendan and Juliana, who were clearly a couple, and there was new furniture and new flooring in there. The next witness, Detective O.J. Falk. He was a crime scene detective with the Fairfax Police Department, but now he's retired. He investigated Joe Ryan's vehicle, and on the driver's side floorboard, there were 2 red cell phones. The next witness, Terry Leach. He's a major crimes detective with the Fairfax Police Department. He was the lead crime scene detective. He responded to the home, and they did their initial walkthrough. Photos were taken. And then they had a detective go through with a Faro laser scanner. These are so cool. It spins 360 degrees and does millions of points of measurements. And then it spins again and takes photos. And what you're left with is a 2D and a 3D model of the crime scene. I've been in court when these are shown, and it's almost like you're just back in the crime scene. You're able to turn that as if you're turning around. It's very, very detailed. He also mentions Joe Ryan's body was still on scene and was there for several hours. The reason, they had to get a search warrant and they were waiting on the medical examiner. His body was removed later that day. We don't see the photos on the feed, but he describes the photos. The first one is Joe's body. His shirt was pulled up. He had a chest seal on his left side. That is where they tried medical intervention. His pants were unbuttoned. He watched body cam from the officers that were first on scene as they walked in, and Joe's shirt was down and his hands were across his chest. He obviously was moved for medical intervention. His head was resting on a dog bed and his legs were under the bed. On the floor, there were pajama bottoms and black underwear under a checkered piece of cloth. They show blood on the floor under Joe's head after his body had been removed. It was a flow pattern. He also had blood on his face, his arms, his chest, his hands, and his clothes. He saw on the left-hand side of the bed frame a blood stain, which was swabbed and sent for testing. There's photos of the blood-soaked carpet with blankets, a sheet, and a towel. The blanket was large and blue in color. They took that back to the crime lab and hung it up to document where the bloodstains were on it. It was large, probably like a queen-size blanket. They flip it over, and the Sherpa side shows the bloodstains more clearly. They show another angle of the bloodstains on the floor, and he shows where Christine was found. They pulled the carpet back to see how far that stain went down. For Joe Ryan, the blood soaked the carpet, the foam pad, and onto the subfloor. For Christine, it soaked through everything except there was less blood on the subfloor. They didn't see any probative value in testing the blood on the floor since Christine's body was found there. Some of the stains indicated blood dripping onto the floor. The knife was found under the blankets. Moving on to the firearms, they showed Brendan's service weapon with that flashlight on it, and you can see blood stains on the weapon. There was also a stain on the bed that came off of the weapon. Then they show a photo of blood spatter on the wall. That was swabbed and sent to the lab. They show a white laundry hamper. There is a lot of blood spatter on this. They also show the dog bed once Joe's body had been removed, which had a lot of blood. Christine's pajamas had one leg inside out, and the crotch region of the underwear was torn or ripped. There's also a photo of a black shirt with the back completely cut. Next to Joe's left hip and partially underneath him, they found a flip-flop and a backpack. After they emptied the backpack, they found blood spatter on the back panel on the inside of the backpack. Inside the backpack, they found rubber exercise bands, a metal rod with eyelets in it, lubricant, a chain with padlocks with the keys in them, clothespins, a roll of electrical tape, a COVID mask, an apricot, and a gag. They also found a receipt from Walmart in Joe's wallet. That was for lubricant, the apricot, and also some dental floss sticks. His coat was underneath his body. In the front pockets, they found his car keys and wallet. There were also zip ties found on the floor. Next is a photo of a sheet that was from Juliana's room. It was fluoresced, and they were looking for body fluids. That was sent for testing. For Brendan's clothing, they show his blue jeans, button-down shirt, and a black coat. They had all of this on a mannequin for the jury to show how he was dressed that day. The coat and the jeans were sent to the state lab. The jeans were bloody, and then there were spots on the jacket that they wanted to have tested as well. And he points out circles where it had been to the lab, and those were the areas they had tested. On the carpet, they mostly saw smears or smudges, but they also found droplets in spots too. Brendan's shoes had blood on the top, the bottom, and into the treads. Juliana's shoes had blood on the soles and the back, as well as her socks. Her socks had more blood in the toe area. They also sent the insert of her shoe to be tested. Joe Ryan's shirt had blood stains on the chest area, and then you can see a projectile defect on the left side. His jeans had blood stains mainly on the upper leg area in the front. Then they bring in surveillance from McDonald's. The distance, by the way, was just under 3 miles to the home. You see Brendan's car come into the parking lot. He pulls in almost like he's going to go in the drive-through line, and then he leaves. But then he comes back through the drive-through and gets in line. He pulls up and places an order. Then they show a shot of him at the pay window and then in the exit area. 8 minutes in, we see him pull into a parking spot. He gets out of his car and walks inside and goes to the restroom. At this point, it's 7:29 a.m. 7:37, he is on his phone walking back to his car. He backs out and leaves. So we know about the phone call, but let's go through the times and who called who. 7:36 a.m., Juliana outgoing to Christine. 7:37, Juliana outgoing to Brendan. 7:38, Brendan calls Christine twice. And then at 7:38 as well, he calls Juliana. 7:42, Brendan calls Christine's phone twice. 7:47, Juliana calls 911. Remember, this is that call she made after Christine told her to call, and then Brendan gave her the hand signal to hang up. Just moments later, 7:47, 911 calls Juliana back. It was missed. 7:48 and 7:49, there were two canceled calls to 911. And then at 8:08, Juliana calls 911, and that call lasted 8 minutes. On cross, he asked why certain things weren't tested, why some things were, and that goes on for a bit. The next witness, I'm going to butcher his last name. I just listened to it. I just can't retain it. Matthew Naderreiter. He sells windows and talks about the triple pane glass option. Most people get a double pane. A triple pane means you're trying to do more than just protect the house from the sun, but it does make energy savings about 30% better, and also the noise level of what goes out or in much less. They bring in the invoice. They were ordered in August and installed in December. And if I'm reading this invoice right, it looks like the total due for all these windows was $33,847. There was a deposit of over $6,700, which left a balance of almost $27,100. Dang, that's like a whole car. On cross, you don't know if it was Brendan or Christine who called to express interest in new windows? No. He also said from deposit to install, it could be anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks. The initial quote was for a double pane, but later it was increased to that triple pane. And the last question, was there any discussion of Dulles Airport going over their house? No. Anything about a local fire department? No. There was never any discussion of noise. The next witness, Miss Shotwell, she's with Silver Eagle Group. Shotwell, what a name for somebody who is a manager on federal firearms licenses. They bring in the federal form. It's a transaction between a dealer and a buyer for a gun sale. And they also bring in the background check. She brings in a check-in sheet for using the firing range. Brendan checked in beginning in 2020, but the two key dates Juliana went with him was on October 29th, 2022 and December 23rd, 2022. He came back January 28th of 23 and bought the firearm. The next witness, Douglas Gutekunst. He's a fingerprint specialist with Fairfax Police Department. He examined multiple versions of a single latent print for comparison, and that print came from the knife. He got known prints from Joe and Christina from the medical examiner's office on February 28th, and he also got Brendan and Juliana's at the police department March 2nd. That print he looked at was inconclusive regarding Brendan and Joe, but ruled out Christine and Juliana. The next witness, Kara McCarthy, she is a supervisor of firearm and tool marks, and she determined that both guns were used to shoot Joe Ryan. And the defect in Joe's shirt showed the shot came from a distance of at least 21 inches or more. So it was not point blank. The next witness, Catherine Colombo. She is a forensic scientist with the Virginia Department of Forensic Science. She got blood samples from Christine and Joe that were taken at autopsy, and then she got buccal swabs, which are cheek swabs, from Brendan and Juliana, and developed DNA profiles for each of them to use for comparison. Okay, I'm going to tell y'all right now, one of the reasons this is so late, other than doing Nancy Grace, is because I had to watch the DNA section 3 times, y'all, thrice. My brain was not computing. It all started sounding foreign to me, and I think my Adderall wore off this late in the day, but y'all, it's been a struggle. I'm going to rewatch this again over the weekend. If I made a mistake, I will correct it. But for now, let me tell you what I got. For the knife, for the sharp edge of the blade and the heel of the blade was positive for Christine's DNA. Where the blade and the handle meet was a mixture of Christina and Joe's DNA. Fitted sheets from Juliana's room. The DNA that was taken from sperm on the sheets was obviously positive for Brendan, and there was also a mixture that was not sperm. That sample was Brendan and Juliana. The swab of a stain on the wall was Joe. The front of the laundry basket, the DNA was Christine and Joe. Side of the laundry basket, Christine's DNA. There were 2 carpet stains that were Joe's. One of those was in front of the laundry basket. On the side of the bed frame, there was a mixture of DNA that was referred for another analysis with a lab that had better software. For the physical evidence recovery kit, these are swabs of the genital areas and the mouth. The oral sample was positive for blood, but no male DNA was found on any of these samples, so no further testing was done. For the swabs on her left and right breast and the back of her left hand, there was DNA from more than one male, but there was insufficient information to draw a conclusion regarding Brendan. And because statistical calculations would not be conducted, there were no conclusions for Joe Ryan as a contributor to be offered. For swabs of the left breast, the right breast, and the back of Christine's left hand, there was DNA from more than one male. However, there was insufficient information to draw a conclusion regarding Brendan, and because statistical calculations would not be conducted, there were no conclusions for Joe Ryan as a contributor. For the back of the right hand and the left palm, they were positive for Christine's DNA. On some of these samples, she explained that she was unable to do some of the testing on these mixtures, but some of the samples may be suitable for further Y-chromosome testing. This type of testing ignores the female DNA that is present and only focuses on the Y chromosomes, which are only found in males. She explains this testing is not as discriminating as the standard method because it could be traced back to any male in the paternal line of the contributor. And a few of these samples were tested this way. So for the back of Christine's right hand and left palm, of course, Christine's DNA was on there. The Y chromosome test we just talked about was performed and it was positive for Joe's DNA and any male relatives on his paternal side. On the back of the right hand, there was DNA for Christine and Joe. For the right palm, Christine's DNA was there. Also a male's DNA, but they could not narrow down whose it was. The 3 samples that were taken from Christine's neck only had her DNA on there. For fingernails from the right and left hand, there was a mixture showing more than one male. Now, obviously, both were positive for Christine's DNA. And for the male DNA, Brendan was eliminated as a contributor. And since their lab does not have a method to do those statistical calculations needed, she did not offer any conclusions on Joe. As far as the DNA from Joe Ryan, they did the physical evidence recovery kit, which is the genital area, only Joe's DNA. For the back of the right hand, the back of the left hand, and the right palm, the DNA was positive for both Joe and Christine. Fingernail clippings, right and left hand, had both Joe and Christine's DNA. Hand swabs taken from Brendan on the right hand had his DNA and unknown contributors. On the left hand, Brendan's DNA was present, obviously, and it doesn't offer conclusions for Christina due to lab limitations. However, the Commonwealth does point out that Brendan washed his hands before the swabs were taken, which could remove blood and DNA. As far as Brendan's coat, there were no conclusions. There were an unknown number of contributors, and it was very complex in nature. But we do get to a witness later on who testifies about this as well. For Juliana's shoes, there were 16 stained areas across both shoes on the exterior bottoms, the rear, and the back sides. There were DNA mixtures. 5 of those were not suitable for comparison. The remaining 11 samples were positive for Christine's DNA. The sneaker insert from Juliana's shoe was positive for Christine's DNA. And the front of Brendan's jeans, positive for Christine's DNA. And that spatter on Joe's backpack was his DNA. The next witness, Dr. Susan Greenspoon, she got the DNA profiles for all 4. As far as Brendan's coat, the exterior, rear, lower left side, there was a mixture of 3 individuals. 2 of them were Brendan and Christine, but the others were inconclusive. On another stain on the coat, it was positive for Christine and Joe's DNA. Remember, Brendan is accused of manipulating the bodies before first responders got there. She did review a colleague's case file and testified on her behalf. For the side of the bed frame, that blood sample tested positive for Christine and Joe's DNA. The underside of the knife where the blade meets the handle was positive for Christine and Joe's DNA. The last witness of the day, Madeline Crowley, she also tested Brendan's genes. There was a mixture of 3 or more individuals, 2 of these being major contributors, and those were Joe Ryan and Christine. There were no conclusions made for the minor contributor. She also tested other red-brown stains on those genes, and it was positive for Joe and Christine's DNA. And that ended the day. So, like I said, 2 more witnesses on Tuesday. The state will rest. What do you guys think? Do you think Brendan's going to take the stand? Let me know in the comments what you think. I hope you guys have a good rest of your evening, and we will see you soon.